Grant Adams, and I'm here to tell you a little bit about our family from its inception. And I'd like to go back. My father was born in 1875. My mother was born in 1878. My dad went to sea when he was 11 years old. He cooked for the fishermen on the boat. I guess it was mostly suet pudding that he cooked. Fishermen up when they were out to sea. They would go to sea for 2 or 3 days and Dad would cook for them. And then he finally became a fisherman. Father before him was a fisherman. And in 1902 he met Mother. I don't know exactly when he met Mother, but they were married on Christmas Day in 1902. He was 26 and she was 24. And Dad wore a tie. He had a black tie that was knitted for him. And I don't know who knitted it for him, but he thought this black tie was the greatest thing that ever was, so he never wore it. He wore it on Christmas when he was married on the 1902, and then he wore it again on their 50th anniversary. I remember that. And I have it to this day, and it's still in excellent condition, and it's hanging on the wall in my den. They had 6 children in England. January of 1940, a fellow by the name of Alec Crew from Port Crew, Ontario, sent to England and asked for 5 fishermen. He couldn't find good fishermen here, so he sent to England and got them. So 5 of them sailed. Mother came out with 6 children. Jack was 6 months old the day they sailed, and she came with 6 children in steerage in April. Frank would be around 10 years old at that time. And she had 6 children. Mother had a beautiful, I understand it's a beautiful antique grandfather's clock. And she left it with her sister, and she brought out a whole wooden box of iron pots and pans, thinking that she'd need them. But when she got to Canada, she didn't need them because nobody used them. So she had to throw them all away, and here this beautiful clock was left in England. And my mother's sister had a son who wasn't the greatest boy in the world, and so he must have sold it to somebody, and we've never seen it since. It's a shame that it went out of the family because it was a beautiful thing, I understand. And they landed in Halifax and came to Port Crew, where Dad was. We lived in a little house there. It had 3 bedrooms upstairs and just one, I think there was only 1 or 2 big rooms downstairs. They weren't even big because the house was only about 800 square feet, the whole darn thing. And there was 8 of us lived in that house for quite some time. Cora and I were born in Port Crew, and she's 2.5 years older than I am. And I was born, I'm the baby. I was a bad little bugger because I cried a lot, and my sister Edith had to take care of me. And I think she got pretty sick of it, but however, I'm still here and I'm a pretty good guy now. We moved to Wheatley in 1923, the September of 1923. And I was turned 5 years old the day we moved to Wheatley. Here's a picture of Dad and Mother with Charlie and Sis Lamb. Now he was quite a character. He didn't have any teeth. And whenever there was a parade or anything like that, they used to have the 12th of July parades in Wheatley all the time. And so Mr. Lamb would dress up as Popeye, and his bottom jaw would go up to his nose. And he looked pretty much like Popeye, I'll tell you. He was really a character. Dad was a fisherman in Port Crew, and he fished there until I was 5, so it'd be 1923, from 1914 to 1923. And then the McLean brothers sent a word to him they'd like to hire him. So the McLean brothers fishery in Wheatley hired Dad, and we moved to Wheatley. Dad was really the best twine mender along the little Great Lakes. They used to send for him, and anybody had a problem with mending the twine, they'd call Dad in and he'd fix it for them. And so anyway, in 1923 we moved to Wheatley. I was 5 years old the day we moved. Dad, while he was in Port Crew, he earned $12 a week in the wintertime and $18 a week in the summertime. And of course he got a big raise when he moved to Wheatley. I suppose he got 25 or something. I don't know exactly what he did get in Wheatley, but I know that in Port Crew that's all he used to get. Here's a picture of Dad with the fishermen in McLean Brothers Fisheries. And they were all great people. And I used to go down to the fishery on a Saturday. And Dad would always take an extra sandwich when he went down, because I'd need a sandwich when I got down there. So when I went down on Saturdays, noon came and the fishermen were all eating their lunch. Dad would give me the sandwich, but also every other fisherman would give me half of one of their sandwiches. And that's when Dad said I had hollow legs. When we moved to Wheatley, this is a picture of the family. And Dad dressed us all like this on $18 and $12 a week. And I just don't know how he did it, but Mother, of course, Mother worked too. Mother in Port Crew, she cleaned the school, along with taking care of 8 kids. So you know what she was like. She was a real rock. Dad's first on the left, Frank is second, Les is third, Edie is fourth, Sonny is fifth, and Cease is sixth. Here's Mother, and Jack in the middle here. This is Cora, and this is me at the age of 5. I guess it was 4 or 5 in there. But I to this day, I don't know how he dressed us all like this on the money he was making. And of course, I don't think Mother made too much when she was working at the school, because they sure didn't pay that much. However, that's what happened, and just remarkable people as far as I'm concerned. This is Mother in front of our house, our house in Wheatley, the second house that is. And this is another picture of her in front of the shed. It was a shed, it was actually, I guess it was a one-car garage, I don't know, but it was pretty worn, pretty dilapidated, and it's since been torn down. The first house we moved to when we moved to Wheatley was near a creek, and I don't remember too much about it, and we didn't live there long because Dad saved up and he paid $1,200 cash for this house in Wheatley. And how he did it I still don't know, but he's a remarkable person. This house had a kitchen, a dining room, living room, dining room in the middle, and then a living room in the front. 3 bedrooms upstairs, I'm sorry. It had 3 bedrooms upstairs. And Dad always went and played pool. Saturday night, he would go down to the pool room, play 3 games of snooker, and come home. But in his pocket when he came home each Saturday night, he brought two bars of taffy. And Sunday morning, of course, Cora and I'd wake up, and the first thing we'd go for would be his pocket down. It was hanging up down at the bottom of the stairs. And we would each get this bar of taffy. And that was our treat for the week. I went to school when I was 5. I went to kindergarten first, and then I moved up to the grade school and went from 1 to 8 there. And I was really good in grade school. I didn't have to study or anything. That was my biggest problem, because when I got to high school, I didn't know how to study. And I only went to high school 1 year and flunked out. I failed grade 9. And so I dropped out of school and went fishing. Went floating fish, down Olmsted Fishers. And I filleted fish for until '39. In about 1933, I got a call from a friend of mine in Detroit, wanted me to go and fillet fish in Detroit. We used to fillet fish in Wheatley for 3/4 of a cent a pound. And you know how long it would take to do a pound of fish. So anyway, when I went to Detroit, all of a sudden I'm getting 3 cents a pound. And we made a lot of money in Detroit. And in those days, that was the time of the Depression, which I didn't even realize there was a Depression, because living with Dad and Mother till 34, 33 it was, I guess. When I went to Detroit, we always had food on the table, we always had a good meal, we always had clothes, we always had everything. And this is a picture of the boys in our family. I'm on the left, I'm about 16 years old at the time. And next is Sonny, the next is Frank, who was the oldest in the family, and then there's Dad, Les, then Cease, and Jack. Jack was second to me, and the boys. In the middle of the Depression, oh yes, the Depression was on at this time. This would be when the Depression was in its full tilt. But all of our family was working at the time. Jack worked in the bank, and I was working in Detroit probably at this time. And Cease was fishing, Sonny was a plumber, Frank was a fisherman, Les was a butcher. This is a picture of some of the girls in the family. Maggie's on the left, then Mother, then Lita, Maggie was Cease's wife, and Lita was Sonny's wife, and then there's Edie and Cora. Picture of Mother in a little hat. Mother always wore little pillbox hats, and she'd have, she really liked the hat. And she never went out without a hat on, but they were always very tiny, little round hats she would have, or whatever. Our food was, when we first lived in Port Crew and Wheatley, every Sunday we would have a roast of beef, and we'd have pudding, either suet pudding. And suet pudding is nothing but flour and water and suet all mixed together, and it's wrapped in a cloth, and then you put it in boiling water. And as it hits the boiling water, the suet all explodes and goes out through the pudding. And of course, we lived on this. A lot of people don't like it because it's just fattening, they say, but I didn't get fat on it. But anyway, we had suet pudding 4 different ways. Mother would cook it as she did in a cloth, dip it in boiling water. She would have pudding around the dish. She would have the pudding and lay it around the edges of the roast. The roast would be in the middle, the potatoes and vegetables would be on the bottom, and the pudding would be laying around each side of that was delicious. It used to have a brown topping on it. And then she would have what they called spotted dog. Spotted dog is the ordinary pudding rolled in a cloth, but it had raisins in it. And when we ate it, we ate it with brown sugar and butter. We put lots of butter on it, and then put brown sugar on it, which made it absolutely delicious as far as we were concerned. And then another way she used to do it, she used to lay the suet pudding out on a round bowl, she would roll it up on a round, like a pancake. Then she'd boil beef in cubes. Then she'd lay all these cubes of meat in the middle and bring the suet up around the outside. Then she'd put in a great big boiling pan and cook it. Now when we had that on a Sunday, I can always remember, everybody ate so much that all the men would be out laying on the ground trying to get over the darn full bellies. It just brings back so many memories of living in those days. We used to have, when Dad fished, on March the 15th, they used to start fishing. They would put the fishing nets out, and when the first fish came in, Dad would bring home a bunch of perch, that he had skinned. We left the bones in them. In those days they didn't fillet fish. And they left the bones in them, but they were delicious. And we lived on fish and suet pudding and beef for years and years and years. And I never ever have gotten tired of fish. I can eat fish 2 or 3 times a week this right now. As I say, Dad had a pig in Port Crew that he raised. And it became my friend, that pig. God, I played with it and I did everything. And then all of a sudden, the pig is dead. And that Sunday we got roast pork on the table. And I was so angry, I just got up and walked out. I never did eat. I never did eat pork after that for many, many years. Oh, Christmas. Well, Christmas, Mother always made a Christmas pudding. And she would make it, and it would be huge. And it would be this big around, and be this high, and it was like an igloo, shaped like an igloo. And when she would put it on the table, it would fall, if it was a little too rich, it would fall apart. Then she used to make a sauce that went on it. And oh my heavens, it was delicious. Oh, presents, we'd get one present. We were lucky to get one present. I forget now what we did get for presents, to tell you the truth. But remember Dad had a knife, and he gave it to me one year. It was an old knife. He'd had it so long that when he sharpened it, the blade was only about, the blade was worn right down. And he gave that to me. Greg got it later, I think. But, and Dad, when he went to cut the roast beef, he would go up, we had a cement front porch, and he used to do his knife and sharpen his knife on the front porch. Yeah. Then he would come back in, and he would cut one end off the roast beef and put it on my plate. The other end would go on Cora's plate because we both liked well-done meat. In Wheatley, when I moved there, it was 700 people. And it stayed 700 people until I came home from the war. And they were mostly all fishermen. They either fishermen or worked as part of the fishery. Oh, I played baseball. I played ball all my life. We used to have a ball game. We had a ballpark in Wheatley. We had the first lights in our ballpark in Wheatley that in Essex or Kent County. We had a lighted baseball park, and Wheatley had a great baseball team back in the 30s. Wheatley had a beautiful baseball team, and they used to play all over. Played right as far as Delhi, Blenheim, and all those places, and Cotton. And I used to play softball myself, and we played softball a lot. Dad was a champion soccer player. He played soccer for Hastings in England when he was when he was going fishing. I think he started with the big team, but when he was 18, and he played with them for many years, and he was an excellent soccer player. And Sonny was a good baseball player. Sonny used to play center field for Peely Island, and Peely Island had a good baseball team too. They used to go all over Sandusky and Put-in Bay, all over playing. We used to charter the Peely boat, and it used to take us over and wait for us to play ball and then come back. The Oddfellows Hall in Wheatley had a dance every Friday night. It'd be a square dance, and us young guys used to always go there and square dance with the young girls, and I enjoyed it very much. We did a lot of square dancing, and every once in a while we do a little foxtrot, which I became pretty good at dancing in the slow dances, but I never could dance the jitterbug. Your mother, she jitterbug all over the place, but I couldn't do it. And but we had some wonderful times in Wheatley. In Wheatley, every Saturday night, they built a bandstand in the park in the center of town. And we used to have a band. I used to play in the Wheatley band. And we used to play at the park. And we would have what they called Saturday night concerts. And people from Detroit Leamington, Windsor, all over would come down to these Saturday night concerts in Wheatley. And we used to have 3,000–4,000 people there sometimes, mostly maybe 2,000, but it was just fantastic the amount of people we drew in these parks. Now, when I lived in Detroit, it was in 32 and 33 and 34, and that's when the Detroit Tigers were in their heyday. They won the World Series in 34, and they won the championship in 33. And we used to go to ball games all the time, especially Friday night. Friday would be a ball game for us. And so anyway, we went to the Fox Theater every Friday night, actually. We went to the Fox Theater or the Michigan Theater. There's always big plays on them. And they had Tommy Farr there one time. He was a boxer that everybody claims he beat Joe Louis. And then they had, we used to see Kate Smith. We saw them all the big names in the Fox Theater. And it was quite a time in our life, between the ball games and the theater. Peely Island has always been a very important part in my life. Frank and Cease, as I said, moved there in 23. And the year that I was 6 years old, in fact, I don't think I was even 6 because I was 6 in September. And I went to Peely Island and stayed with Cease and Frank in their homes. And I used to chum around with a fellow by the name of Jim White, who was Cease's brother-in-law, Maggie's brother. And we used to have some wonderful times. We used to fish. And we used to do everything over there. We even stole grapes. We got caught one time. And I tore my pants going over a fence, I remember that. But we used to hunt pheasants on Peely. The pheasants were introduced to Peely Island in about 32 or 33, somewhere in there. And we used to hunt pheasants there. And it was a wonderful time. I don't hunt anything anymore. I've got rid of all the guns. I don't have a gun at all. But anyway, Peely was always a good place. We went to Maggie, Cease's wife, used to make pancakes for us. And she would make pancakes as long as Jim and I could eat them. Cease, he tried to keep up to us, but he couldn't even try it. He couldn't even make it. We would eat 8 and 10 pancakes at one sitting. And they were excellent fish cookers, both Maggie and Hazel. Frank's wife was Hazel, Maggie was Cease. And Cease rather, I'm sorry, Cease used to smoke catfish. And we would sit at the table in Cease and Maggie's home in the kitchen. They had a table in the kitchen. We would sit there, and Cease would smoke catfish. And we'd eat catfish and drink beer. And it was really something. When I first started to go to Peely, we used to go on a Peely boat. And the captain was an old fellow by the name of Captain Sheets. And he used to dock at the North Dock, which is Scudder Dock. And it sailed, it sailed for many, many years. In those days, Lake Erie used to freeze right over. And it would freeze over sometimes 2 and 3 feet thick. And when it did that, the people on Peely Island used to drive across the ice and in the wintertime and go to Leamington or Kingsville and shop. And it was quite a thing. They had quite a road going across there for many, many years. And but what they used to do is they carried a 12-foot plank on each side of their car. And it was a huge plank. It was very thick. And if they came to a crack in the ice, they'd lay the plank down across the crack in the ice, and then they'd drive over the planks and go to the next part. And if there was another crack, they had to do the same thing. There was an unfortunate incident. People by the name of Phelps, who were relatives of Frank's wife, Hazel, and they were going over, and there was 4 of them in this car, and they were never heard from. They never ever did find them. They must have went through a crack in the ice and were all drowned. I continue to go to Peely every summer, and for years and years and years. In fact, I was over there a couple of years ago and fishing, and I love Pele Island. I could go over a year, but we used to fish a lot. We went to Pele Island one time, and we went off the west side and we were fishing for pickerel, which is they call walleye now. And that whole lake was just covered with pickerel. We would go out and fish and catch our limit in about an hour and go back in, go out and catch our limit again. In those days you could do that. As long as you only brought in 6 at a time, you were allowed to have as many times as you wanted. But now you're only allowed 6 a day, so you're only allowed 6 in possession. But the fishing on Pele Island, black bass, there's a picture here of somewhere of black bass they used to catch off the north end. And 3 and 4 and 5 pound black bass were nothing in those days. Here's a picture of Cease when he owned the tug. He owned the Pele Island. He went from Pele Island to the mainland and brought back all kinds of vegetables and fruit and potatoes and groceries, and also brought back many barrels of oil to the island. And this is a picture of him. He went, there was ice in the lake, and he rode right through the ice and went from Pele Island to Kingsville, picked up his load and took it back. His boat was called Mr. Rick, which is a grandson of his. And he sailed that boat for many, many years. I kept going to Pele Island until the war, when I joined the Navy, of course. And then I had to quit for this. But even after I come back to the Navy, I still went to Pele Island. The war had a very big impact on my life. Because when I got out of the war, I decided I was never going to work for anyone else again. And so that made the reasons why I made the choices I did after I got out of the war in 1945. But to start with, in September of 1939, war was declared on Germany. In 1938, a young fellow came to Wheatley to work in the bank. His name was Ernie Simpson. Ernie and I became instant friends. And so in September of 1939, when war was declared, he and another fellow by the name of Fred Houston lived in Wheatley. We decided to get down to London and try and join up. We all wanted to get in the Air Force. So anyway, Fred and Ernie and I went to London, and we tried to get in the Air Force, but of course you couldn't take you at that time because they didn't have the facilities to train you. So Ernie and Fred left their name in the Air Force, that was all, but I put my name in the Navy and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police too, because I didn't have much else to do in Wheatley, so I wanted to join up. And so I was called by the Navy. But in 1940, in July of 1940, I was called into the Navy in Windsor, Ontario. And in September of that year, I went to Windsor and was inducted into the Navy. Spent 6 weeks in Windsor training, just an ordinary training of the seamanship. And in October of 40, I was drafted to London, or to Halifax. Then I was assigned to the submarine detecting school. It's called ASDIC, A-S-D-I-C. Anti-Submarine Investigating Committee is what it was called at that time. Now it's sonar. And so I spent 10 weeks training to be an ASDIC operator, and graduated from that in I think probably January of 41. January of 1941, I joined the Cobalt as a corvette, a short forecastle corvette. I just got drafted on board her, and we got a call that there was a submarine. There were submarines out off the Halifax Harbor. So they sent ashore a message for everybody to come back aboard the ship. Well, a lot of the boys didn't make it back because they were someplace in Halifax and couldn't make it back. But we went out for 6 days. It was 6 days of waves 20 feet high. And I was so sick. I was never so sick in my life. I used to get sick when I went fishing with Dad, but boy, I would tell you, I was sick on this one. When I came back in after 6 days, my stomach was so sore I couldn't even smile, let alone laugh. At this point, Frank and Cease were both on Peleanum fishing with their families. And Edie was in Windsor. She was in Windsor. Sonny was in Leamington. He was a plumber. And Les, he was a butcher in Wheatley. But Les, Cora, and Jack all later joined Les joined the Army, Cora joined the Air Force, and Jack joined the Air Force. And but this was a little later on. I think maybe they were in October when all of them joined. I was drafted off the Cobalt, and then I was sent down to commission the Camaros in Sorel, Quebec. And that was in, I think, April of '41. And we commissioned the Camaros and brought her back to Halifax. And we did our run-ups in a place called St. Margaret's Bay. Run-ups are when you practice your runs on a dummy submarine and things like that. They had an old submarine that they used, and that's what we used to practice on in St. Margaret's Bay and out in the ocean off of St. Margaret's Bay in Nova Scotia. We were drafted, the ship was drafted to Newfoundland, St. John's, Newfoundland. And we made a couple of runs. What we did was we would take the convoy from St. John's to just south of Iceland. The British Navy would come and pick it up at that point, and then we would return with another convoy coming back from there that they had brought to that point. We did that for a couple of runs. In October of 1941, we made a trip with a convoy. The convoy's number was SC-48, and we were just south of Iceland when we knew that something was happening. And at about in October the 17th, and the night of October the 17th and 18th, I think it was, we were hit by German submarines. And it was a pretty bad night. I was called to accident. We were called to accident stations about 6:30 that evening, and I never got off the set until about 5 o'clock the next morning, just for one little break. But we had a terrible night that night. We lost several merchant ships. We lost 4 Navy ships to German submarines. Then the night before that, the convoy before that, Ernie, my best friend, was on it. Was on a merchant ship going to England. He was a pilot officer observer in the Air Force, and he was on a ship going over to England to join the Royal Air Force, be with the Royal Canadian Air Force, of course, in England. And the night before we got hit, his convoy got hit, and Ernie was lost. Terrible for me. I didn't find out about it until about a year later. And Fred, he was a pilot, a Spitfire pilot, and went to England after Ernie, and he was shot down, not shot down, he was practicing night flight in England, and he crashed into another airplane. 2 airplanes crashed, and he was killed. So I was the only one left of the 3 of us that went to London that day. I came back to Halifax in January of 1942, and our ship had to go in for a refit, so a bunch of us were drafted off and did different things. I was drafted off and to take a course, and so I went out. Jack, my brother, is in Timmins, and they had just had a young son, Grant, and so I got leave, and I came to Toronto, and went up to got on a train, and went up to see Jack and the new baby, because he was named after me, and I was pretty proud. I'd been taking a course, I think. And in April of 1942, I met this young girl in Halifax, and she was walking across the dance floor, and I looked at her and I said, "That is mine." I went over and asked her for a dance, and we danced. And then every night or every day there was a dance, where I would be there and she was there, we'd be dancing. I was drafted on the Woodstock, and we did a triangle run, what they call the triangle run was from Halifax to St. John's, Newfoundland, and down to Boston or New York and back to Halifax on a convoys in that area. And so each time I would come back in, why, of course, I would go to a dance, and I would see my little girl again, and we would dance. And so this was April. In June, I asked her to marry me. And she was foolish enough to say yes. So we were married in September of 1942. We'd had about a 5-month courtship. The triangle run was a good run for me because every time we got into Boston or New York, there would be tickets to a baseball game or a basketball game or whatever would come down. It'd be 50 tickets come down aboard ship. And all of us would go and see these basketball or baseball games. I sat in the bleachers at one baseball game for the Boston Braves, and it was a doubleheader. And this fellow by the name of Ace Brown pitched the first game and won. And they was playing the second game, and Hooba came up with Ace Brown and sat right next to us. And we were talking to him, and he was all through the second game. He sat with us and talked to us. He was really a nice fellow. And so anyway, then we came back. I came back to Halifax, and I was on the Wentworth at the time. Just drafted on the Wentworth, and so in September they gave me 10 days. I was leave to go home after Mickey and I got married. And when I came back to Wentworth, it left. And so I was stuck without a boat for a moment, and a ship rather. And so then I was drafted to a place called Niobe in Scotland. And it was just a barracks, of course. It was just a training place. And I was to join the Moose Jaw in Scotland. So I was on the Queen Mary, sitting in the Halifax Harbour waiting to sail for Scotland. And of course there was about 10,000 other servicemen on her. She was loaded to the gilt. We slept in bunks, 4 bunks high. Each bunk had to get up a bunk and get to sleep there in the bunk, so it was a pretty rough trip. So I was drafted onto the Moose Jaw, and we sailed in December of 1942. We set sail for, took a convoy down to Gibraltar. We made one trip from Londonderry to Gibraltar and back, and on the next trip down, why, there was action stations, and the big battleship Graf Spee was out there. And so everybody was, the whole Navy was at battle stations when that thing was around. But anyway, we didn't see her. We were at action stations for about almost a whole day, I guess. Because we were in the Bay of Biscay when it happened, off of Spain. And so we continued on, we were continuing on down to Gibraltar, and then we took convoys from Gibraltar in the Mediterranean along the North African coast. It was beautiful sailing in there, but it was still a little rough. We were based in Algiers, and we used to sail down the Mediterranean down to Oran, Philippeville, and Beaune. And then we would turn around and come back and catch another bring a convoy back and take another convoy down there again. Beaune is just south of Malta in the Mediterranean, I think. And so anyway, we were in Beaune one day, and this single German airplane come flying over, and who knows who got it, but somebody shot it, and it came down, and it landed right in next to a jetty that stuck out from the harbor in Bowen. So we got grappling hooks and went out. We tried to grapple parts of the plane up. We got one part up, and the shipwright on the ship, he made us a lot of us identification bracelets. And I lost mine somewhere. Still don't know where. I give my arm to have it back, but I don't know where it is now. But that was a bad day. Of course, nobody knows who shot it down because everybody was shooting at it. But on the convoys, North Africa is the whole coast, northern coast of North Africa is mountains. It's mountainous. And so the planes would come flying in. They'd go over the mountains and they'd get down on them about 200 or 300 feet from the water, so they would be in between the mountains and us. So you wouldn't see them until they were maybe, 500 yards away. And by then there was firing, and now they'd be over you, but it was quite some trips down there, in those trips. I was on deck one day and looked out, and here was a tug towing half a ship back to Gibraltar to be repaired. Just half the ship was left, the other part was gone. When you're at accident station, you have time to think. But the only time that I really thought that I could have been lost was when we were coming back from Iceland. We had been blown, we took a convoy to Iceland, and the convoy that we were to meet to bring back to Newfoundland hadn't arrived yet, so we went into Reykjavik, Iceland, to wait for the convoy. And that night we were blowing aground. And when I woke up the next morning, one side of the ship was laying in the mud, and the other side you couldn't see any mud. It was so far over. So we had to wait till high tide, and 2 American destroyers pulled us off of the reef. So we had to come back to Halifax alone. We had lost our dome that I used for the sonar, so we weren't any good to anybody, so we came back to Halifax, to St. John's, Newfoundland alone. And about 2 days I guess, was out of St. John's, we started to ice up. And this is a picture of some of the ice that was on the ship. But we had so much ice on the ship, when you hit a wave, the spray would just come over the ship, and you don't say if salt water doesn't freeze, it sure as hell does. Because it would freeze on all the stanchions, on the boats, it froze on everything. And the captain was afraid that if we got too much ice up on top, he would roll over and that would be the end of it. So even he was chipping ice. Everybody on board ship, the cook, everybody was chipping ice to try and keep it from getting too top heavy. So as I say, that was the only time I really was scared. I guess I was scared. I was just so worried that we were going to roll over, and I didn't want to. That's about the worst way you can die, is a ship to roll over, I think. But anyway, we got back into St. John's, and all was well. And thank God for that. I was made a petty officer. My advancement was a chief petty officer, rather. And so I was drafted to Cornwallis, to the instructor school, and I spent a year there. And in December of '42 is when Judy was born. And Mom and I were, oh boy, that was the year, those were days. And in December of 1942, she had, her water broke, or she had problems again, so we took her to the hospital. But we had to walk from this little place. Mom's in labor pains. We're walking through about 3 foot of snow for about a quarter of a mile to get to the road, where a fellow by the name of Eric Adams took us to the hospital. And that evening, the next day, of course, Judy was born. I was on a little run at the end of the war. After Cornwallis, I went on the ship, and we were in Halifax, in Yarmouth, Nova Scotia, and the end of the war came, and the war in Japan, or in Europe, VE Day. That was the day I want to forget that day. But anyway, the boys made a mess of Halifax. It was too bad. But anyway, I was discharged in Yarmouth, Nova Scotia, and then that was July the 4th, 1945. And I came home, and I got off the bus, and I walked across the street. I looked at a baby buggy, and there was Judy. Looked at the butcher shop, and there was Mom. I think those 2 days are probably the happiest days of my life. Because Judy had been awfully sick, and they finally got her to the proper doctor. She was really a bouncing baby girl at that point, and she was so nice. The war was over. Well, at this point, Les was in the army. He'd been in the army. Les was quite a bit of action in Germany and Holland and all over. He was a gunner. He had they used I guess it was about a 4-inch cannon. And of course, she was in the Air Force. Jack was in the Air Force at the same time, and they all were discharged later. The two boys Frank and Cease were still on the island. Edie's still in Windsor. Sonny is still in Leamington Plumbing. And then Les and Cora were discharged after. And of course they came home, and Jack was discharged after when he came home. And but Jack at that point was in the mines. He went to Malartic in northern Quebec. When in 1945, September 1945, a fellow by the name of Murray McLean took me to Windsor and introduced me to the Dodge and DeSoto dealer in Windsor, and he set me up with a sub-dealership, they called it, for Dodge and DeSoto in Wheatley. And so I came back to Wheatley, and of course I didn't have any money. So I went to the bank to borrow some money. They said, well, I need at least $3,000 for them to lend me $3,000. So I went to Imperial Oil and told them I had $3,000 that the bank give me. So they loaned me $3,000, and with that $6,000, I built a garage in Wheatley. But we finally got the garage built, and we didn't get too many cars in those days because you had to, it was right after the war, and everybody had to have a permit to buy a car. This is a picture of my mother and father on their 50th wedding anniversary, and he was a pretty good looking guy. But Dad was, he was some kind of a guy, that. And then we have the picture of their 55th wedding anniversary when all the children got together. And there's Cora, Frank, Cease, me, Edith, Sonny, and Les and Jack, all in order. This was quite a day, I'll tell you. It was to get all the people, all of our family together like that was something we've only done it once. We had a real lucky family. Now whether it was luck or not, I don't know. But my mother and father were really good at buying and fixing us and giving us things that we didn't deserve, probably. But our family never had any real problems. We all got along pretty well. I don't remember any arguments, except that I was a little bit of a nuisance, I guess, to the boys when I was younger. But all in all, our family was very fine. And to this day, we're very fortunate. We have 7 grandchildren, 8 great-grandchildren, and all healthy, all good kids. And so I can't wish for anything more. I'm 92 now, Mom's 88, 87. And we're very, very, very fortunate.
For the memory of sentimental verse, nothing in my purse, and chuckles when the preacher said, for better or for worse. How lovely